The English rule in India was established in the year 1757 after the Battle of Plassey. It started in Bengal when East India Company forces under Robert Clive defeated the army of young Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dawla. This colonial rule was spread to the countryside, affecting the local population. The English East India Company implemented its own revenue policies. It was in the year 1797 that an auction in Burdwan took place. It was a big public event. A large number of estates held by the Raja of Burdwan were being sold. The permanent settlement had come into operation in the year 1793. By this, the EIC had fixed the revenue that each zamindar had to pay. A large number of purchasers came to the auction and the estates were sold to the highest bidder. But over 95% of the sale at the auction was fictitious. It was not only the estates of Burdwan Raj which were the only ones sold during the closing years of 18th century. Over 75% of the zamindaris changed hand after the permanent settlement. By introducing the permanent settlement, the British officials hoped to resolve the problems that they had been facing since the conquest of Bengal. The zamindars had a large number of villages under them. According to company, the calculations, the villages within one zamindari formed one revenue estate. The reasons were: A. The initial demands of EIC was very high. This was a time when the prices of agricultural produce was low. The revenue was invariable and there was a strict deadline on its payment. The powers of zamindar was limited to collect the revenue. A jotedar was a person who holds jointly a piece of land for which he pays revenue directly to the government through his agents. The powers of the jotedars was practically more effective than the zamindars. They were more powerful in North Bengal. The authority of zamindars did not collapse. They managed to wriggle out of this complex situation. When others bought estates within their zamindari during an auction, they could not gain possession. Their position was strengthened when the rules for revenue payment were relaxed. Only when there was a depression during the 1930s that they collapsed, and the jotedars became more powerful. This was a report that was submitted in the British Parliament in the year 1830. This was the fifth of a series of reports on the administration of EIC in India. After its victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, The activities of EIC were closely monitored in England. Archives of various zamindars of Bengal have been examined and researched in detail to provide an accurate history during that period. Buchanan traveled through the area of Rajmahal Hills in the early 19th century. He detailed the life of Paharias. The Paharias lived in hutments within the tamarind groves and rested in shade of mango trees. They resisted viciously any intrusion of outsiders within their area. In the decade of 1770s, the Britishers brutally exterminated these Paharias. The Paharias withdrew deep into the mountains and continued their struggle. The Santals came and settled in these areas, and Paharias receded to the upper regions of Rajmahal Hills. Buchanan crossed the Ganjuria Pahar, a part of Rajmahal Hills, in the year 1810. The Paharias resisted the clearing of forests and were violently aversive to touching the plough. However, the Santals were ideal settlers. They cleared the forests and adopted agriculture as a practice. During the decade of 1850s, the Santals rebelled against the zamindars and the moneylenders, as well as the colonial rule. Buchanan had a specific vision as to what he was supposed to survey and record. However, he was perceived to be an agent of EIC, and hence the reception he received was at times very hostile. As EIC roots became more and more deep in India, it ventured to exploit the natural resources of India. A revolt occurred in the year 1875 in Deccan. Throughout the 19th century, the peasants in various parts of India rose in revolt against the moneylenders and grain dealers. This movement began at a village, Supa, in Pune district. From there, the revolt spread to Ahmednagar. Within a couple of months, it spread over the entire region. With the spread of British rule in India, a new system of revenue collection was introduced. Ricardian ideas propagated that the landowner was entitled only to average rent. In case the land yielded excess revenue, the state needed to tax this excess amount. The system that was introduced in the Deccan area was termed as Rayatwari system. In this, the revenue was settled directly with the Rayat. This was in contrast to the system in Bengal. The soil of a particular area was assessed and the average produce was calculated, and the paying capacity of the Rayat was assessed, and a proportion of that was fixed as tax. In the decade of 1820s, the first revenue settlement in Bombay was made. The taxes fixed were exorbitant and the peasants abandoned their lands and migrated. In the next decade, the problem became more acute. Agricultural produce prices fell sharply after the year 1832. Prior to 1860s, 75% of the cotton in Britain came from USA. The American War of Independence changed it all. Now India was seen as a country which could fulfill this void of cotton supply from America, since it had the necessary geographical conditions. Due to American crisis, the cotton industry in India started booming. The cotton merchants of India wanted to be the leading exporters in the world, displacing America. It was only the rich cotton merchants who gained while poor peasants suffered. But envisaging the downtrend in demand for Indian cotton, they were not keen in extending credit on a long-term basis. This withdrawal of credit did not go down well with the ryots. The ryots were accustomed and used to the credit extended by the moneylenders. The moneylenders were considered as deceitful by the ryots. In 1859, the limitation law was passed, which stated that the bonds signed between the ryots and moneylenders would only have a validity of 3 years. In 1878, the Deccan Riots Commission tabled a report in British Parliament on this issue.